diplomacy, which I think has really served them well. Of course, they have their conflicts with China. They have their territorial disputes with China. There are the water hosing incidents around the Paracels. But the point is the Vietnamese do not rely on their military force, but rely mainly, on diplomacy to be able to chart this independent path. I think we should do the same thing. We should also learn how to spend our resources in a way that we're not just waiting for hand-me-downs from the United States in terms
Absolutely.
of
That's where I agree. Let's
of-
not have ourselves
of-
for cheap. Yeah, exactly.
Sure, right. And I think you can have a good, smart military policy that's geared to defense without having to massively spend your way into to reach that goal. So, but what you need is a serious government that basically says, okay, we want to be um, pursue an independent foreign policy and a defense policy. What are the resources it will take, both diplomatically, militarily, and economically? That's the sort of thinking really that needs to go into this. And Richard, I have so much faith in our people that if we just had good leadership, we could, become
Absolutely.
basically a good, an effective small country that would be able to carry its punch in regional affairs. But the problem is just this focus on dynastic politics and this dependency on the United States, this hand-me-down uh, kind of thinking. And then, of course, the sort of totally colonial attitude of the Philippine military that basically says there should be no way that we should be separated from the United States. That, I think, is the greatest barrier to becoming a real effective player on the regional and international stage. Some countries have been able to do that, have been able to focus in that way, even though they're small. They have been able to carry a good, sense of where to go. I talk about Singapore. Okay, Singapore is, I mean, in terms of its military, it's nothing compared to any of the other countries around, not even the Philippines. But it carries a punch above its weight because it is able to combine military defense and the domestic policies in a fairly effective way that makes it um, a bigger voice when it comes to regional affairs than, say, the Philippines. So that's what I'm saying. That if you had smart policies, you could be just as effective, if not more, than Singapore. The problem is we're a nation adrift because we're a country that has no effective leadership at this point in time, and we get tossed between easy solutions like this time we'll side with China, next term we're going to be with the United States. So we cannot afford any more of these pendulum swings. I mean, 150 years is more than enough of this. Okay.
But again, I mean, it's not like Singapore has territorial disputes with China. And Singapore has mandatory military service, I think 2 years for men. They have massive submarines. They have one of the best weapon systems anywhere in the world. I heard friends from Japanese defense forces telling me the Singaporeans can give them a good fight. And not to mention, Americans enjoy permanent positioning of literal combat ships in Singapore. So are you suggesting that we have to be performatively balancing like Singapore? I think some people say if you look at really Singapore behind the scenes, they're working way more with the Americans than the Chinese, but they can play the game very well. So you're talking about some
That's it.
sort of sophisticated diplomacies. So I'm glad this conversation is coming out because otherwise, in another
Sure.
forum, we're just gonna name call each other. Oh, you're Amboy, you're China boy, and
Yeah.
I think this is why people have to hear this because at the end of the
Smart.
day, exactly,
Smart politics and
performative.
smart diplomacy with limited resources, with smart politics and limited
Punch.
diplomacy,
Yeah.
we can have a punch beyond what we are right now. But that's the problem. We don't have the leadership that's able to provide that because our elites are so concerned about cornering their part of the national wealth that the idea of a strong, independent, resource-based foreign policy is beyond their thinking. So this is I tell you, Richard, I served in the Philippines House of Representatives, and you could count the people there who had a sense of the national interest. It was just really what is in the interest of my family and what is the interest of my dynasty. And the Marcoses and the Dutertes fall into that. That's how they think. The identification of the national interest with the dynastic interest, that's the tragedy of our politics that people like Paul Hutchcroft and others have called attention to us. That we're trapped in this sort of what do they call it now? Patrimonial oligarchic system that continues to reign as the reigning political system in the country. So how do we break about from that? I think that's the serious thing we really need to do, because unless we break away from this elite-dominated and elite-centered politics, we're not going to be able to unlock the spiritual, material resources that our people, that's there. What our people are looking for is leadership that can unlock their energies because they believe, in a cause. And that is the cause of where the Philippines is going. Can you just imagine if, we had a leadership that could unlock that instead of, screwing around, which these dynasties have, unfortunately, have had such a limited national horizon that, they're the biggest, I hate, well, let's put it this way, they're the biggest obstacles to unlocking the energies of our country. And our people have to realize that they have a responsibility to push these people to stop, getting in the way of our national destiny, to put it that way. Okay, we still really have to become a full nation state, and that is the challenge of our times. Aside from, of course, social
Right.
justice and all of that.
I obviously agree that I think when it comes to strategic culture, I think a century of dependence on America is really corrosive. And I think even Americans themselves, I mean, one of them said damaged culture. If they went as far as accusing us of having a damaged culture. I think it's not in the DNA of the Philippines to be dependent on the US. It was just a historical and geopolitical accident. And now with a more dynamic era, and the Philippines is no longer small, Walden. We have as many people as Mexico, right? We have a $500 billion GDP. We're still a developing country, but we're about to become an upper middle income country. So we're not rich.
Sure.
We're not going to be a superpower, but I think you have more room for maneuver. And with more
Well,
resources, definitely should
No.
come more imagination and creativity in diplomacy.
But that's one of the problems that we face. And I was head of the Committee on Overseas Workers, during that time. And, Richard, you were the ones who was helping me at that committee. And I think one of the things that really was so bothered us at that point in time was that people couldn't wait to get out of the country. Okay, like so you had this sense that the destiny of somebody who wanted to make it in life was to get out of the country. And I think that continues to be the prevailing mood among large parts of the younger generation. And I think that we're not going to go anywhere until we're able to overcome that mood that our place is to be outside, and rather to have a sense that, hey, this is a country worth living in, and this is a country that's worth fighting for. And that's, unfortunately, that's not there at this point in time, but that's the kind of culture. Because the challenge is all-sided and comprehensive, you know that, okay? And
Absolutely.
that's what and beyond the material stuff, okay, beyond the demographic stuff, this is really a fight for the soul of our country, and that's essentially what it's all about. And unless we're able to get our people, to really have this sense of we're destined to be something more than just a reproducer of the workforce that goes to different parts of the world, I think that we're
And
not going to.
suffer horrendous conditions. You all then know that, better than any one of us. You had to rescue. You met OFW stranded outside our consulate in Saudi Arabia and many places. Obviously, you got into trouble with a lot of dodgy people because you called them out for their shortcomings. I feel you. I know this is a fact. From my own experience working and covering this throughout the years. I completely agree with you, Walden. And you won the top human rights award for doing something special, and that is to talk about economic justice, to talk about importance of having the right trade and industrial policy. So we had some conversation on foreign policy. I think it's pretty clear to people that we have some divergence on tactics and approaches, but in terms of goal, we both want an independent, self-reliant Philippines. But the other thing we want is an economic growth that trickles down. World Bank says that 40 richest family took home 76% of newly created growth. The Razons of this world are juicing it every month or so. They have $500 million or $1 billion being added to their to their net worth, while inflation is eating into the basic necessities of a lot of our kababayan. So I think, as much as I want to talk about the Philippines as a rising middle power, I'm brutally aware of those realities. Where I want to ask you, Walden, is, speaking of US and China, speaking of alternatives, and also as India and others come up, what should be our strategy to make sure we get the most economically out of these great powers and rising powers and our relationship with them? Do you think we should still pursue high quality investments from China? China now is #1 in EV cars. I don't know if you're into EV cars, but I'm looking at BYD and I'm so impressed. I was just in Cebu, I saw BYD. I was just in Amsterdam and I saw NIO. I was just in Auckland and I keep on saying these Chinese brands, EV cars. China has a lot to offer aside from cheap fake stuff, as people know. So do you think we should have a balanced relationship whereby we can also get good investments from China, but also maybe from US? We are still not getting very high quality investments from the US. Where's the semiconductor investment? I'm still waiting for that. Japan may be a little bit better. So what is your stance on the industrial foreign policy, trade foreign policy? I think that's where your unique contribution is really worth commending, Walden. And I think that's where I've been a student of your work on industrial strategy and foreign policy.
Well, again, I think that a number of countries like South Korea and Malaysia and Indonesia and even Thailand, basically, when we, during their period of industrialization, which was in the 1990s and the 2000s, I think they pursued largely a policy that was guided in terms of deepening their industries and making them much more effective. And they did this through different means like tariff protection and other components of industrial policy like local content policy. So my sense is that even as the technocrats of these countries used to talk about free trade, in actuality they controlled the market, they controlled the trade. They had tariffs that were much higher than the Philippines, even as they said that we're out to eliminate the tariffs as demanded by the IMF and the World Bank. And so because they were quite pragmatic, they were able to build up, um, you know, solid industrial capacity. Okay, not perfect, but you know, for their level of industrialization, it was quite good. And they also had uh, basically rather, you know, they had a sense that you couldn't be doctrinaire. You couldn't say it's just the market, it's just free trade. That you had to be able to bring the state or government into an effective trigger for development. And that's what we lacked in the Philippines at that point in time, because we were so dominated by the World Bank and the IMF in the period in the 80s and 1990s. And one other thing that happened is that we made paying the foreign debt that was left by Marcos the priority, because the bankers wanted it. And so a lot of the resources and the thinking and the policies that our neighboring ASEAN countries were able to follow, the Philippines was deprived of. And so you now have a situation that industrial, you know, that growth, yes, there's all sorts of economic activity that adds up to GDP growth.
But it's not quality. It's
But
not inclusive.
it's not right. It's not inclusive. It's not quality. It's not headed in a certain direction. So my the thing we have to face, Richard, as you know, I've always told you this, and you, I think you agree, is that we can't afford to have an agriculture that's on its last legs. We need to revive our industries, okay, that you know used to produce quality stuff, like talk about Angtibay shoes, back in the 70s and the 80s. But all of those were wiped out because we basically fell into this trap of saying that that we could lower the tariffs to whatever low level we had, and not expect that to have a damaging quality in terms of what happens to the little industrial infrastructure that we had. So basically, I think when it comes to the economy, Richard, there are big two challenges. One is, of course, as you already mentioned, it's got to be income redistribution and asset redistribution should take place. That can no longer be postponed. And the second thing is you really need, a good forward-looking strategic industrial policy. And under the current neoliberalism that basically says, just leave it up to the market to determine where you should be going, that's not going to happen at this point in time. So you end up, people don't have jobs in industry, people don't have jobs in agriculture. So the business processing operations, are here today and in India tomorrow. So it's to be expected that if structurally people are being blocked from jobs in solid industrial agricultural sectors, that they would look to moving abroad and basically saying goodbye Philippines, but I have better chances elsewhere. So this is sort of the
So Walden, what is the way forward? Because if you look at a lot of studies, and I think both of you also respect this, people like Danny Roderick, for instance, One Economics, many recipes, very heterodox, very familiar. I mean, he's a Turkish American economist, very familiar with developing countries, industrial policy. His idea is that we cannot do industrial policy like the 20th century because of changes in supply chain economics. But what we can do is have a kind of a bottom-up niche targeted industrial strategy. So you want to focus on semiconductors, go for it. You want to focus on EV cars, go for it. So Indonesia now is focusing, for instance, on iron ore processing, trying to move into battery EV development. Thailand already benefited from the old version of industrial policy, and they're trying to get also on the new ones. And South Korea is already a world leader, so they're already at. So, what do you think the Philippines should do given our geopolitics, given our current conditions? How can we have a smart industrial strategy where we can bring in the manufacturing that is important for national development? Because inevitably, Walden, that means banggain mo talaga yung mga oligarchs, di ba? And short of revolution or something violent or something, I don't know, populist Duterte style kind of take out this oligarch, put my own oligarch kind of style. What is the way forward? Do you think having certain corridors of economic development, maybe where, I don't know, the Aboitiz and those people give, I don't know, cheaper electricity and water, or maybe infrastructures? But I mean, what is a realistic way forward? Should we juice out the Americans and say, hey, for all of the military facilities you're getting, for heaven's sake, put some decent investments? Ask the Japanese to put in more money there. I'm just looking at the short of violent revolution. You know,
Sure. I
what
mean,
can we?
yeah, nobody's talking about a violent revolution at this point in time,
Mhm.
but I think we need to look at those areas where we do have, you know, a good base, or we used to have a good base, and I think we should not underestimate our ability to be able to develop a diversified and vibrant agricultural sector. And if you know if you know if what it takes to do that is not just technology but social reform, in terms of agrarian reform that basically gives farmers a stake in developing a vibrant agriculture, then I think we should undertake those policies instead of following the WTO's demand that we scrap all our tariffs and basically just let the foreign goods in. And I think we used to have a very vibrant agricultural sector. I grew up in a time when Philippine agriculture was, yes, it was export oriented, but there was also significant parts of agriculture that was domestic oriented. I think we need to be able to recapture that sort of agricultural base. That's why we cannot, it's not just going to be technology, Richard, but you really need also real agrarian land and asset reform. And that's just agriculture. I think when it comes to industry, I think we really need to really look at what are the, we have many skilled Filipino scientists at this point in time. They're all scattered all over the world. And what if they can come back and, we can maybe focus on developing high value kind of highly sensitive technological industries.
Involved in
So
semiconductors, maybe more
yeah,
high-end fabrication, package design. Yeah.
nandun lahat yan eh. We have all these people that have those skills. And one of the important things about an industrial policy is how do you bring these people to come and we need not just go back and invent the wheel and just start with electronic assembly. We can start at certain high-end industrial processes and then build backward. So, but the policy has to be there, and the ability to push that policies has to be there, and not just to talk
And
about
how
it.
do you navigate the question of the oligarchs who control electricity, infrastructure, all the
Well,
bottlenecks?
this is
Because may oligarch din naman ang Indonesia, may oligarch din naman yung chaebols in Korea. But so what happened that in those countries the oligarchs were tamed, but it looks like in the Philippines it's the state that is tamed. I mean, what explains the divergence, right?
well, this is precisely. I think you hit you hit the nail on the head. It's the sort of different relationship between the state and the the oligarchs. In places like South Korea, you definitely had the state playing the leading role, and if this families that headed the Jaebol did not want to go in a certain way, then they were disciplined by the state. So my sense is there's space to be able to build up an effective state at this point that can in fact discipline the oligarchs. So
Well, how do you do that? Because in the case of Korea, we know that was a dictator Park Chung-hee who did that. Japan much earlier during authoritarian imperial regime. Thailand, obviously, the junta in one way or another has always been in power. Indonesia a little bit started during the new era. But now at least we're seeing under more democratic regimes, whether it's in Malaysia, whether it's in Turkey, whether it's, well, not so much Turkey anymore, but whether it's Indonesia, for instance, under Jokowi, there was some sort of industrial strategy. So how can we do that in the Philippines as we have it right now? So it's a very policy-oriented question, Walden, more than theory of the case, I would say.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely would say, and we could start not in big terms like, hey, we discipline you. We start with things like tax policy.
Tax breaks, subsidies.
Add, those where there are not just tax breaks and subsidies. I'm more talking about real taxing power. And we cannot tackle all the problems all the time, but if we can just tackle the taxation issue, okay, in which we have an effective taxing authority that can then generate the resources that can then be funneled to different areas of development, that would be a big achievement by itself. So, but again, becomes a political question. Do you have people in government that are willing to challenge the oligarchs? And it becomes then again a political will, question. But my sense
is it only, Walden, sorry again for pushing back, is it only again political will? Because my understanding is that first of all, discursively there's a problem in a sense that pag tinignan mo yung opposition sa Pilipinas, the dominant opposition, if I can put it that way, although they're not so dominant in the greater scheme of things, it's all about, no corruption and transparency. And we all know that corruption alone doesn't explain really much in terms of long-term economic development. I mean, Korea has been corrupt like heck. China has been corrupt like heck. I mean, we all know that the correlation between corruption and economic growth is far more sophisticated and complex than all of this simplistic rhetoric kung walang corrupt, walang mahirap, and all of that. No offense to them, but I think that liberal discourse, that it all goes down to having a nice, I don't know, person there na hindi lang corrupt and everything will be fine. I think it just completely misses the point. So there's an intellectual gap, there's a discursive gap before even talking about political will and confronting the oligarchy, right?
Yeah, of course. I fully agree with you. And I should have mentioned that, basically, corruption language or corruption discourse really doesn't get you anywhere because, I mean, economic development is, as you said, far more than just people not being corrupt. Okay. You can in fact have a situation whereby, there's, as you said, in China and in others, there has
now
been
Vietnam, right? I mean, we're seeing lumalabas na yung baho, di ba? Tens of billions in fraud and all. But you and I have been to Vietnam over the past 10 years. You barely see any poor persons from Da Nang to Hanoi. It's impressive what Vietnam has achieved.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's what I mean. That let's not get caught in the corruption discourse. Yes, we need corruption, but more important is really a good sense of direction, a set of policies, and a core of progressive kind of technocrats, if I may use that word, that can lead the way, forward. We can have. So I fully agree with you, Richard, that we need to the corruption discourse because it's not leading us anywhere.
I mean,
Yes,
we condemn this corruption, just to be clear, because they're idiots. They're going to twist our words. May mga dilawan dyan, Walden, I caught them twisting my words and I called them out, these idiots. Like, for instance, they twisted my word on inflation. I said, for instance, in Turkey or Argentina, a horrible inflation. But what matters is real wage increase. If your real wages, if your wages beat your inflation, then, you're willing to take some risk. But they twisted it into say, oh, Richard is pro-inflation. So just to be clear to some idiots out there, we're not saying corruption is okay. We're just saying there are more important things than just this moralistic discourse, getting the industrial and trade policy right. Sorry, well, I just have to emphasize this because, we're hitting some vested interests, some idiotic
of course. And I mean, one of the things that I've consistently pushed is that corruption is bad, but it doesn't really explain why we're in the state that we're in. So we've got to go beyond it, and we need to talk about policies. And when you talk about policies, then you come up against structures that need to be changed. And that's where the big challenge is. Madali masyado yung corruption discourse. And everybody uses that, to explain everything, especially, corruption discourse is what the elite engage in, which is, I'm corrupt, my enemy is corrupt, I'm not corrupt, my enemy is corrupt, and this is why you should elect me.
Corrupt siya.
Mas corrupt siya, whatever. But yeah, let's condemn corruption, but let's not get bogged down in having it be the all-purpose explanation for everything. Policy is key. And policy means you come up against structures. And the big challenge is, how does one come up against oligarchic structures with good, smart policies, that brings down these barriers one by one. Okay, so yun ang sort of pragmatism that we need at this point in time.
Last part of this, sorry, Waldo, kasalanan mo yan kasi you went into foreign policy. I had to lay out my case, but
Sure,
I think this is a debate that people have to see. Because I think the problem is we're talking past each other and just I'm not talking about you and me, obviously. I'm talking about this foreign policy discourse. And I think we have to go beyond this puerile binary, Team US or Team China. That's pathetic. We have to talk about Team Philippines, right? What is a Philippine first foreign policy, if I can put it that way without sounding Trumpian? But last part, Walden, I think this is really, really important. And to be honest, this is what I was really hoping to discuss more, but I can get back to you hopefully down the road, God willing. What is a lesson we can learn from other countries? Because the opposition in the Philippines is not doing very well. If you were to believe some of the surveys, for instance, the Okta survey shows that 30+% of Filipinos are solidly or somehow solidly behind Marcos. Around 15% around Duterte. We can debate about that. But I think what was really instructive with those surveys is that it shows that more than 4 out of 10 Filipinos are just switching off. They're just disinterested. They gave up hope, or they're cynical. They just want to migrate. They're sick and tired of usual politics. Only 4 or 5% said they believe in genuine opposition. And I don't know what opposition did with the Pink movement. Those more than 10 million people voted for Lenny. What happened to that? The question I have, Walden, is how to move forward. How to get majority of Filipinos, or at least a huge plurality who have lost interest in politics, interested again in politics. What are the steps forward? Because this, lahat yan disinformation, that's essentially elitism and blaming the voters. If you're going to say it's all disinformation, I mean, like whatever, right? Of course, disinformation is a problem. All of us have been victims of disinformation, but it doesn't, I mean, it's just like the corruption discourse, right? Of course, disinformation is bad, but it doesn't explain everything. There's so much more to that. And all of this, dinayaan na lang tayo. It's all the SD cards and all of that. Of course, there's cheating and all of that. But again, it doesn't explain everything. What is the lessons from Brazil, for instance? Lula came back. That was like what, his 5th elections, and he came back after, I mean, he's not a young man anymore. He had to overcome a lot. So why is the left or even liberal left in Latin America so successful? Chile. The guy there is my age. He's like 36, 37. Who's your president of Chile? In Brazil, in Peru. I mean, what's happening there that it's not happening in the Philippines? I mean, Mexico, they have a woman. minority background, even in Mexico, who's the new president. Why not in the Philippines? Because aren't we very similar to Latin America? Inequality, feudalism, Spanish background, oligarchy, very similar, right? And yet their opposition is doing far better than us. What's going on?
Well, I think you've had political parties here that have, like in Brazil, the Workers' Party in Brazil, from its origins back in the 70s and 80s, really had a program for change. And it may have faltered in many ways, yes, in the Dilma, the Lula and Dilma administrations, it might not have been that, courageous in really confronting the oligarchic structures. Maybe it made use mainly of its budgetary capacities or capabilities in order to eliminate significant poverty, but not really change the structures. And that's what has been the criticism of the PT administrations over here. But they had a sense of what direction change should be in. And I think that is also what you find in places like Chile and other Latin American countries, some other Latin American countries, that basically you need to confront and be serious about structural change. And out of that, need for structural change to come up with certain policies. Now, I'm not trying to idealize what is happening here, but they're certainly ahead of the kind of politics that we had, where in 2022, the leading presidential candidate had no program at all. Well, the two of them, Duterte and Marcos, basically decided that we cannot offer a vision because the only thing that's important is unity, unity, unity. And that still continues to be the case at this point in time. So, however imperfect the attainment of their visions, the progressive parties here, whether in power or in opposition, did have a sense of direction in which to bring the country that you do not have
Electoral success. I mean, that's my point. At least they win elections. They take over power. I mean,
Sure. I mean, and the capacity to be pragmatic, in terms of their participation in the political process. So, I think that that's the big difference, and nowhere was it more evident than in 2022. We had a campaign that was built on nothing but the word unity, and then compare that to electoral contests in Latin America, where people offer real different visions of change. Now, as I said, once they're in power, they may falter, they may derail, they may do this, but nevertheless, it's very important to have a vision that to offer people. So I would say that in the Philippines, this is also what we really need to strive for. And I would say that it would be very important for us to combine a progressive vision with savvy and pragmatism in electoral politics. And that sort of combination has eluded us so far.
I know you're tired and we have a long conversation on this. I want to ask you a little bit about this, Walden. I mean, you know a lot about Latin America. You did your dissertation on Chile in a very important moment. From my understanding, you're versatile in Spanish. You have understanding with the language and culture. I was told by someone within the opposition, I had this conversation about we're very similar to Latin America, but in some ways we're also not similar. And one of the things that was told to me was, Richard, people like you who are very outspoken and passionate and all, maybe you can get away with it in Latin America. Maybe they'll like, the corazon you put into your politics and all. But in the Philippines, people get offended. Medyo snowflake daw tayo. Medyo kailangan mo kausapin ng mabuti. Kasi if you say something strong, baka ma-hurt na sila. And napaisip ako doon, baka because I notice a lot of people are annoyed with me even if I don't mean bad, right? I mean, I'm just an outspoken, passionate person. And I notice in the Philippines, medyo mas sensitive tayo. I mean, at the end of the day, you can say we're more Asian, whatever that means. In a sense that it's not like people and other cultures don't care about face, but to what degree do you buy into that argument that maybe we don't also have this culture of good confrontation, if I can put it that way, of passionate debates, of you know what I'm saying, and then yet shake hands and hug each other afterwards. You know, that kind of a cariño brutal, no, that you see in other cultures in the left, in España, in Latin America. Parang medyo, you know better than me, but pansin ko yun yung kulang sa liberals in the Philippines. Maraming snowflakes, maraming malaking ego masyado. You just say something na hurt na sila. They cannot withstand passionate politics. And passionate politics is the way to push the envelope, right? You are a very passionate. You're crazier than me. So like
No, definitely. Definitely. But you know, I guess making enemies is part of the game. And if you don't have enemies, that means you're not making a difference. So I don't mean to say that the more enemies we have, that means that we're effective. I'm not saying that at all.
exactly, just to be clear.
But I'm just saying that, you know, we need to be very frank about where we are, and if it's confrontative, we deal with that. You know, one of the people that was very interesting is not so much in Latin America, but in Thailand. See, Thaksin,
Absolutely. I wanted to go there.
who was a big reformer, despite the controversies, he went out of the mold of Thai political culture that tended to be very, very sensitive to others and not say anything in formal
Very
conversation.
Chinese. Their elite is
Yeah,
very
he
Sino-Thai.
was very, yeah, I know, he was very curt. He said, "Yeah, we need to do this. You're a bastard," you know, that sort of thing. So he was so out of line with Thai political culture that it was appreciated.
But unlike
by
Duterte,
people.
he was effective, just to be clear. Because when you said Mura and all, like everyone said, but we had Duterte. But the big difference, Duterte was a fraud. Thaksin got things going, right? He was effective. He changed things. I'm not a fan,
Yeah,
but you know better than me, Walden, right? Thaksin was it. He got things done.
Yeah. Well, yes, I fully
Compared to
he
Duterte.
yeah, he got things done that also created a lot of enemies in the military and that sort of thing. But as I said, you know, to be effective, you have sometimes to risk making enemies. With Duterte, I would say he wasn't just a fraud. He was a real killer, man.
Yeah, but Thaksin had the drug war too, right?
Yeah. I mean
It was
but
horrible too.
not in the scale of the Duterte, which you know, I mean, we're talking about 27,000 people. That's horrible, you know. And so I would just want to say that, you know, yes, he was a fraud. You know, he had a foul mouth, but that, you know, it's okay to have a foul mouth if you're serious about your politics. But no, he was a fraud and a mass murderer. So that's really what the difference between him and, say, Hugo Chavez, Thaksin, and some of these other larger than life personalities that were very, very serious about change. And you know, Chavez was one of them. You know, he was, you know, a friend. You know, and he really, you know, he delivered. And
He sowed the seeds of disaster, right? I mean, Maduro is a complete disaster for
yeah,
Venezuela.
yes, Maduro is, but I think that was not necessarily where Chavez was headed for. He was a real reformer, and so
Did he call you El Profesor or something like that?
oh, no,
Chavez?
he said mi padre.
Ah, oh my
Mi
God.
padre.
Yeah, well, he had that, you know, like Karl Marx, and you know, like he had that thing, right, with Hugo Chavez and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again,
Well,
that's why I don't want to go to Hugo Chavez, because again, they say, oh, we need a strong man and all of that. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, Hugo Chavez was a military guy. There was an element of authoritarianism,
But
to be
at the
honest.
same time, yes, he was a populist, but he was, you know, it was within a democracy that he had, and really very different from, say, his successor at this point in time.
Complete dictator. I mean, some would say authoritarian electoral, but you're right. I mean, Maduro is a complete mess, and I think we have to admit that that was a disaster, and they give a bad name to the left. But Walden, I like what you're saying here. I know it's self-serving for both of us because we're very, passionate kind of persons. We piss off a lot of people, maybe unnecessarily sometimes. But I want to. So what you're essentially implying here, Walden, is that because I'm looking at PITA, I'm looking at Future Forward Party, which I move forward, which no longer exists, but they're gonna make another party and they're gonna stick it together. And I remembered when Taksin was studying PITA and said they're so good in TikTok. These guys are great. So parang nanganak yung Taksinismo, right? Ng mga new progressive counterparts, right? I mean, PITA in a way is a youth progressive counter response to Taksinismo, right? I mean, so what you're saying is that you need path breakers. You need people who break the mold, create a new space. And Thailand, former conservative, former, even Chinese, if I could put it in terms of their elite Sino-Thai, very Sino-Thai, Thais, Taksin, very Sino-Thai. They show us that actually we can make the Philippines a more dynamic political landscape if you know how to push the envelope and get things done. Is that what you're saying, Walden?
Yes, definitely. That would be one of the things that I would say we sometimes the way that things move forward may be in unexpected ways, just like the creation of a Future Forward and Move Forward party. But they're going to be, and I tell you, these are very serious young reformers. And they're
serious
not
people. I always say they're serious people. They mean
they're
business.
serious
They're not
people,
messing
and
around. Hindi sila pa-cute.
hindi talaga. They're not going to be, they're going to reform into a new party. And I don't know how long the Thai establishment can keep on preventing them from coming to power. But I think that it's just a matter of time, because definitely in the next elections, whatever is going to be the successor of the Move Forward party is probably going to be again the top notcher in the elections. And so I would say that well, you've met some of these people. Some of them are my friends, and they're very serious in a way that
People.
elite politicians in the Philippines, or even middle-class politicians, are not. So
Yeah, walang pa-cute sa kanila. I
really
mean, they're good in social media, pero hindi sila pa-cute. I mean, these
And
people are willing to go all the way. That's the difference, eh. Tama lang you do TikTok, tama lang you do social. Yeah, but you have to mean it. Hindi yung pa-cute lang and then things go a little bit scary. Oh, ayoko na, mag-migrate na ako. I'll go to New Zealand, whatever. It doesn't work that way. Wala tayong tinatamaan. Wala akong sinasabi, Walden. I'm just saying what I'm saying, right? Last point.
Baka magalit yung mga pumunta sa New Zealand sa iyo.
Then I love New Zealand. I'll tell you a story. So I was in New Zealand, right? Pauwi na ako, and we were talking about Senate. And I said, oh, you think Bato and Robin Hood is the worst? It could get worse next election. And I talk about prospects of, I don't know, Polong and Basta. And sabi na, buti nga nag-migrate tayo. And I said, what? I'm here. I'm going home. Sorry na lang, diba? But the last thing I want to say here, things are feeling a bit different here, and we can talk about differences within the left and all of that, but now there's open conversation about Riza considering going for at least the number 2 highest office in the next election. That that she no longer has to settle for anything less than vice presidency, if not the presidency. Of course, we can have a long conversation about viability things, but at least there's that air of hope and possibility that I think we never thought possible, maybe, or maybe not as probable as we see it right now. So for all your criticism of Marcos and Duterte fight, I think it at least opens some space for Riza and the rest to breathe and imagine a new possibility. What do you think about this? And what do you think Riza should do? What do you think? Again, I don't want to put you into trouble, but in a constructive way, how should Riza, I mean, she's getting it obviously more right than the liberals, the low ones, but how can she get it even more right and pave the way for some transformative politics come 2028?
Well, I think that Riza definitely, is from a progressive point of view, the dominant figure, political figure at this point in time. her concerns, her legislative priorities, which she has been able to achieve, and her putting herself on the front line to of national interest I think very, very admirable at this point in time. I would definitely say, in terms of a viable figure that is charismatic and can in fact win the allegiance of people, especially the youth. I think Riza is it. And I feel she brings certain qualities of idealism and pragmatism, that is exactly, I think, what we need at this point in time. So I'm very happy that people are considering her for, higher position. And I'm so happy that I was able to have the chance to work with her, in a couple of years ago. So I think her performance. I mean, if you talk about who really shut down the Pogos, okay, it was Risa. Okay, and I think that is
And got
something.
Kiboloy into hiding-ish.
Yeah, sure.
Harry
Sure.
Roque
So
on the watch list now. I mean, like all of this clownish
yeah,
figure.
yeah, and that's a very, and basically what she has done is stand on her principles. Roque might have tried to use his awful mouth to try to get out of traps in that Senate hearing, but he wasn't able to because he was just seen as a slimy character compared to Risa, who was serious about pursuing the national interest. So So I would say yes. I would definitely think that that Risa does deserve a higher position than the Senate at this point in time. And who knows, things can change in the country
For
so that
better.
the election becomes open to her kind of politics. So she has a very good political instinct, I believe. Um, 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 what is effective uh, at this point. And I believe she does have a good staff that helps her navigate the way in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, she's the first social democrat, progressive / socialist senator since Isabela de los Reyes, if I can
Yeah.
recall. And then so you guys have been among the few legislators with progressive leanings and fighting it hard. So here we are. I mean, from the hellish years of Duterte, again, no credit to BBM, but at least there's some opening. And that's what perhaps where I'm coming from. But I agree with you. There should be no complacency. We should make sure that we're not played by the superpowers while holding our line and holding the ground. And I'm glad that, people could see we have some differences of opinion at least initially. But I think in terms of the direction for forward, and you keep on affirming my instinct na medyo peronist na you need sometimes to push it and a little bit left and a little bit right and all of that, and the Taksin example was not helpful, but thank you Alden for reaffirming some of my sensibilities. That's very helpful. I know there's so much we can discuss, but I know you have a long day ahead of you. Thank you very much, Walden, for that fantastic discussion, and I hope in the coming weeks or months, especially with my updates to ICC, something close to our heart, it looks like things are moving a little bit in the right direction. I was at The Hague not long ago. I heard some things here and there about ICC. So maybe we can discuss things on a more positive note, because you don't seem very optimistic on some of the domestic politics part as of now. Salamat, Walden. Mabuhay ka. Obrigado.
Sure. Hey, Richard, take it easy.
God bless.
And I have to go back to my conference, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
God
And I'll
willing.
have something about what's happening in this part of the world.
Exactly. Inshallah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.
Bye. Right.